Hold on to your textbooks, because history as you know it is about to be rewritten. Prepare to uncover groundbreaking discoveries that have been intentionally erased from the annals of time, hidden away from the public eye. These are not mere footnotes or minor details. They are revelations that challenge our understanding of the past and reveal a hidden narrative that could change everything. From suppressed inventions to silenced voices, the truth behind these erased discoveries will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about the world.
Starting off our list today with the Frankenstein bog mummies. In 2002, a team of archaeologists discovered two bodies in Scotland, belonging to two people who had died 3,000 years ago before being thrown into a bog, where they were preserved and mummified and then buried 300 to 600 years later. One was the body of a man, and the other the body of a woman, or so they thought. Upon closer inspection, researchers quickly realized that something about the skeletal remains of both bodies weren't quite right. The man's limbs seemed out of place, and the woman's jaw was slightly too large for her skull. Fast forward 10 years to 2012, and researchers discovered that they didn't find the body of two people, but the body parts of at least half a dozen. The woman was made up of body parts from people who had all died around the same time, while the man was made up of parts belonging to people who had died up to hundreds of years apart. Not only that, but evidence suggested that when the parts were put together, they would have still had mummified flesh on their bones, which is unpleasant to say the least, but it's a super dark and incredibly interesting discovery.
So this is incredibly cool. Archaeologists in Crete may have recently come across the most famous labyrinth in all of history, the labyrinth that was said to hold the Minotaur from Greek mythology. The Minotaur was a fearsome creature with the body of a man and the head of a bull, which lived in a labyrinth on the island of Crete, as the story goes. So this 4,000-year-old labyrinth on the island of Crete may have been the actual inspiration for that ancient story, which is amazing. The labyrinth was found on Papara Hill, and it's the first structure of its kind discovered in the area. The Greek Ministry of Culture says the Minoan civilization built it between 2000 and 1700 BCE. It has 8 circular stone walls arranged into a maze formation, and some parts of the walls are still standing up to 5.5 feet high. The structure is divided into 4 sections by internal walls, creating a series of passageways, and inside there's a small circular building also divided into quadrants. Now, aside from the labyrinth's potential connection to that mythological tale of the Minotaur, they're still not 100% sure what it was actually built for, but they did find a bunch of animal bones that may have been used for rituals and offerings. Either that, or animals just wandered into the maze and then were never able to make it out. That's always a possibility as well.
Next up, we have a mass grave discovered in Slovakia just 2 years ago, in 2022, containing approximately 35 skeletons, the majority of which were missing their heads. The grave dates all the way back to 5000 BC, and researchers believe that the bodies excavated from the site likely belonged to the victims of sacrifice. Due to the grave site, which is essentially just a large ditch's proximity to a defense wall, archaeologists studying the find have theorized that the decapitated individuals were killed in the hopes that their sacrificial deaths would strengthen the wall and therefore provide safety to the communities living in the area. Many of the skeletons found belong to people who died around the middle or near end of their pre-adulthood lives, I'm talking 20 and under, which indicate that they might have been sacrificed for their strength, stamina, and agility.
In 2015, archaeologists made a pretty remarkable but unsettling discovery in Flanders, Belgium. They uncovered the bodies of 125 World War I soldiers in a perfectly preserved German trench system. So this area had been untouched since the war ended, hidden beneath what is now a housing development. Most of the soldiers were German, but there were also British, French, and South African men. The soldiers fell during some of the fiercest battles of the war. Some of their remains were found right where they had died. Others were buried in mass graves by their comrades, often with religious artifacts. And the site was about the size of 2 football fields on a ridge known as Hill 80. This ridge saw intense combat, especially during the First Battle of Ypres in November 1914, where a lot of German soldiers soldiers died. The area was later taken by British and Irish troops in June of 1917, but then the Germans retook it again in 1918, leading to even more casualties on both sides. There were more personal items as well, like watches, religious items like crucifixes and rosary beads, and there was even a bottle of HP sauce, which just goes to show that these were real people, you know, making food. And I think a lot of times when we look back on these wars, it's easy to disconnect from the fact that, you know, they had HP sauce they were cooking with. Makes it all seem more real.
Next up, we have a pretty macabre discovery made in 2019 during an excavation that took place in Selango, Ecuador. Along with the remains of 11 people who would have been buried at the site and multiple ancient artifacts were 2 helmets made from human bones. Skulls, to be exact, and young ones too. Apparently 2 of the young bodies they found were wearing the skulls of other slightly older young people over their heads like some kind of disturbing medieval bike helmet. I shudder to think of what they might have used for straps. While it is unknown why the helmets were placed onto the heads of the young bodies, it is assumed that it was likely done so during the time of their burials as part of a ritual designed to protect them in the afterlife. However, other theories suggest that the young bodies were buried as part of a ritual meant to calm an active volcano nearby, i.e. they were sacrifices. It's pretty dark.
So when you look at this image here, you probably assume this poor guy died instantly being crushed by this boulder, right? Well, it turns out that may not be the case. Don't get me wrong, he still died horrifically though. In fact, he went out in a much worse way. This is the body of a man who's been dubbed the unluckiest man, and he died in Pompeii during the eruption of Mount Vesuvius. Archaeologists recently removed the boulder to examine the remains and found that the dude's skull was surprisingly intact. The Pompeii Archaeological Park made a statement about the discovery, saying, quote, "The identified skeletal remains consist of the upper part of the thorax, the upper limbs, the skull, and jaw. His death was presumably not therefore due to the impact of the stone block, as initially assumed, but likely to asphyxia caused by the pyroclastic flow." So this dude was trapped under a boulder. Yeah, I'd say he really lives up to his name. Yippee for him.
Next up, we have the Sandby Borg killings discovered in 2010 during a study of a 5th century Swedish site in the island of Åland. While excavating the grounds, an archaeologist stumbled upon the ruins of an old home, and while exploring the home, they came across a human skeleton. At first, they wondered why it wouldn't have been given a proper burial, but then they came across another, and another, until the remains of 26 people were counted by the team, all showing signs of having died at the same time due to execution-style killings. It became apparent then that a mass killing event had taken place in the home sometime between 450 and 550 AD. Also found in the home were fossilized half-eaten fish, coins, and jewelry, supporting the theory of an ambush attack. But there was no evidence to suggest who carried out the killings or why.
Here's a pretty strange recent find: plastic rocks in nature. Scientists have been looking at Brazil's volcanic Trindade Island for years, but just in 2023 there was an unsettling discovery: rocks made from melted plastic debris. The island has always been a nesting ground for green turtles, but now it's also home to these strange plastic-infused rocks. The plastic rocks are being called plastiglomerates. Plastiglomeratis? Well, they're formed from a mixture of natural sediments and plastic. So they form on plastic waste, mainly from fishing nets apparently, melts and combines with the natural material on the beach. Geologist Fernanda Avelar Santos said the place where we found these samples is a permanently preserved area in Brazil, near the place green turtles lay their eggs. This makes the discovery even more alarming as it highlights how pervasive plastic pollution has become. She continues, "The garbage in the sea and the plastic dumped incorrectly in the oceans is becoming geological material preserved in the Earth's geological records." Interesting to see what'll happen like 100 years from now when this continues to happen.
Next up, we have a discovery made in 2003 by a group of archaeologists exploring the Atacama Desert of Chile. A mummified skeleton that at first glance looks a bit like it belongs to the body of someone or something that did not find its origins on this planet. I mean, it has 10 ribs instead of 12, giant eye sockets, and an incredibly elongated skull that ends in a point. For decades, UFO enthusiasts were convinced that the skeleton belonged to an alien, so much so that the mummy mummy was actually featured in a 2013 UFO documentary. Unfortunately for the believers, in 2018 the alien theory was debunked when good old DNA testing decided to join the party. Turns out the genes were 100% human, and the body belonged to a young female living 500 years ago with severe genetic bone mutations. Or so they say.
And finally, we have Aramu Muru. This place sounds really intriguing to me. So Aramu Muru is a rock formation near Lake Titicaca in Peru, which has some very strange stories attached to it. So this massive stone structure is often referred to as the Gate of the Gods. It stands about 23 feet tall and has a perfectly carved 7-meter high rectangular niche in its center. So the question has always been, though, what is the origin of this place? What was it made for? Local folklore tells tales of the pre-Inca civilization, suggesting that Aramu Muru is a gateway to another dimension. According to the legend, Aramu Muru was an ancient priest who used a golden disc known as the Key of the Gods of the Seven Rays to open the portal and pass through it with his followers, never to be seen again. But archaeologists and researchers, of course, have their own theories. Some think that the place is a ceremonial site, possibly linked to nearby Tiwanaku culture, known for its advanced understanding of stone carving and alignment with astronomy. Until this day, though, the true origin and the purpose of this place is still relatively unknown. But what makes it even weirder is that there are a number of stories of people going missing around here. There are also reports of a strange bluish glow coming from the area.
Starting off at our number 10 spot, we have DNA. In the 1860s, Swiss chemist Johann Friedrich Meister was able to give a name to the molecule that is now known as DNA, which set up huge and very important scientific advancements to come. He initially set out to research white blood cells, which are of course a very key component of our immune system. When he carried out experiments that required adding salt solutions, he noticed that once he added acid, a substance separated from the solution. At first, he thought he had discovered something that was coming from the nucleus of the cell, and while he knew it was an important discovery, he had no idea just how important. He was a major perfectionist, however, so he was quite hesitant to tell others of his findings, so it was a few decades until his discovery was fully appreciated by the scientific community. After this, scientists were able to research further what he had discovered to give us all our much better understanding of DNA that we now have. Those scientists include people like Albrecht Kossel, who in 1881 was able to isolate the 5 nucleotide bases that are the building blocks of DNA, or Walter Fleming, who discovered a fibrous structure within the nucleus of the cell, which he named chromatin, but we now know as chromosomes. This is all to say that Johann's almost accidental discovery changed science forever, and not only was the discovery a shock to the scientific community, but also to Johann himself. In our number 9 spot today, we have penicillin. As it turns out, penicillin, which is an antibiotic that has saved most of us a lot of pain and suffering, was a bit of an accidental discovery, so it was a shock to both the world and the guy who created it. In 1928, Scottish biologist Alexander Fleming was returning home from a vacation. When he returned home and went back to work, he found a petri dish that he had left dirty was full of bacteria and mold, as I'm sure we would all expect it to be. With this gross discovery, however, came the realization that the bacteria was everywhere except for where the mold was. After some further testing and further research, he realized that the mold was responsible for killing off this bacteria, and he was able to identify the mold as being from the genus Penicillium. This is what led to further testing and creation of the most used antibiotic, which is incredibly effective at curing a wide variety of bacterial ailments. In our number 8 spot today, we have bacteria resistance. Okay, so aside from penicillin, there are an array of other antibiotics and vaccines that have been created that have not only helped us survive as a human race, but have also improved our quality and length of life. This is all amazing and truly helpful, but the scientists who study things like this also made a scary discovery that while these treatments are doing great work, there are some microbes who are working just as hard, and they might be evolving faster than we can fight them. This is why the flu shot is created yearly, as the previous shot is ineffective against next year's bug, or why hospitals hospitals are seeing some people have a simple cut turn into a potentially limb or even life-threatening situation because of the antibiotic-resistant staph bacteria, or how there are illnesses jumping from animals to humans, or even how tuberculosis is seemingly making a comeback. These kinds of discoveries are extremely important because it can help us calculate next steps, but it's also incredibly frightening because while we might still be ahead for now, how long is that really gonna last? In our number 7 spot today we have electricity. Many people will credit Ben Franklin with the discovery of electricity, as many of us have heard of his little kite experiment. In this experiment he wanted to prove that lightning was electricity, so he tied a metal key to a kite during a lightning storm, and sure enough, just as he thought, electricity from the storm clouds transferred to the kite and flowed down the string to give him a little shock. I mean, this is a video called Discoveries in History that left people stunned, and I think an electric shock definitely counts as someone being stunned. This led to many other scientists being able to build upon his work and discovery, which all led us to where we are now. I mean, who would have thought that a key on a kite would have helped me film this video with these lights and this camera? There has been evidence that ancient people may have dabbled in electricity themselves, but the extent of it is very much a mystery. Talking about this little experiment is certainly not to undermine the work and intelligence of those who came before Benjamin, because that work is just as important. In our number 6 spot today we have ancient cave art. Just a few short years ago, researchers were in a cave in Sulawesi, Indonesia, when they found some cave paintings. This wouldn't have been a discovery that we would have put on this list until it was realized that this cave art was actually 44,000 years old, making it some of the oldest art that has ever been found. The art depicts some types of buffalo as well as wild pigs, and there are some human-like figures that appear as well, but they are way smaller and also have some animalistic characteristics such as tails and snouts. It appears as though it is some sort of hunting scene, but it is also unclear whether these paintings were made to represent a single story or if they were a series of images made over a course of time. While this painting is not the oldest art we've ever found, if it does in fact depict one single scene, it would be the oldest story ever found. In our number 5 spot today we have this ancient sword. We've all heard the story of Excalibur, but in 2018 an 8-year-old girl had basically the same experience, only a little different. This little girl was playing in a Swedish lake when she stepped on something that felt kind of like a stick. She of course bent down to pick it up, and she said she was going to put it back in the water, but once she saw a handle and a pointy bit at the end, she instead held it up and said, "Daddy, look, I found a sword." Of course her dad came rushing over and grabbed it from her. Once scientists got a look at the sword she found, they were able to date it back at least 1,000 years, saying that it could even be from somewhere around the 5th or 6th century AD, which would place it even before the Viking era by a few hundred years. After another artifact from around the same time period was found in the same area, it drew scientists to the possible conclusion that perhaps this was once an area of sacrifice. For a while the little girl had to keep her discovery a secret and only told her best friend, but once the news broke she was allowed to tell all of her classmates and her teacher, who threw the class a party where they watched and listened to all of her radio and TV interviews she did about her amazing discovery. In the number 4 spot today we have the ancient shipwreck. In 2018, a team of researchers were searching an area of the Black Sea when they stumbled upon a shipwreck. While this is of course interesting, it's not exactly the most shocking thing to find a shipwreck in the sea, but here's the thing. This shipwreck is now believed to be the oldest ever found, dating back to around 400 BC, and it was found still intact despite the 2,400 years it's been. The mast, the rudder, the rowing benches, and even some of the ship's contents were still intact, just waiting to be discovered. Apparently part of the reason for the preserval because of the fact that the water in the depths of the Black Sea is anoxic, or free of oxygen, which is something that I am shocked to discover. The ship is extremely similar to the one depicted on the Siren vase, which is located in the British Museum. One of the researchers on the team who located the wreck explained that it's like another world. It's when the remote operated vehicle drops down through the water column and you see this ship appear in the light at the bottom, so perfectly preserved it feels like you step back in time. In our number 3 spot today we have an early human jawbone. The discovery of a human jawbone completely threw off what scientists and researchers once had mapped out as the timeline for when it was once believed that the early humans left Africa. Before this discovery, the oldest Homo sapien fossil that had ever been found outside of Africa was estimated to be somewhere from 90,000 to 120,000 years old, which helped to create some sort of timeline of how things for the early humans might have gone. Just a few short years ago, however, scientists found an upper left jawbone in a cave in Israel, and they were able to date these remains back 177,000 to 194,000 years ago, suggesting that humans may have migrated out of Africa 50,000 years earlier than what was once believed. It was a huge discovery that only takes us a step closer to learning the origins of our human race. This is just one example that highlights the changes in beliefs and views on our evolutionary origins and our migration throughout the old world all those years ago. In our number 2 spot today we have the Earth orbits the Sun. This is something that I still think even today people have a hard time wrapping their heads around, and that is that the Earth is not the center of our universe. I am. Just kidding. Standing on the Earth feels so stable and stationary, so it feels so hard to believe that we could be orbiting around something and not the other way around. But alas, it is true. When Copernicus proposed that the planets orbit the sun, his colleagues and peers thought he was losing his mind bringing up such an absurd idea. Even Galileo years later got the same kind of grief for bringing up the idea, and he was able to provide evidence for his theory. Still, people were just not having it. Of course, part of this was the church and the scripture which claimed that the sun revolved around the earth, but let's leave the religious beliefs to the church and the science to scientists. Everything that goes on in space truly is very hard to conceptualize and really wrap your head around, so I do understand the hesitancy to just change the way of thinking, but we have had hundreds of years to kind of mull it over, so I feel like we should really be all on the same page now. In our number 1 spot today we have the ingredients of the universe. To piggyback off of the last space point, we have the discovery of what space is made out of. A concept I've really never sat down to think about, but one that now has me spiraling into the abyss. So when we think of space, we usually think first of planets, stars, galaxies, dust, black holes, you know, space stuff. But what happens when a scientist lets you know that all of that stuff only makes up about 4% of what is in space? Well, you start spiraling like me, because what is the rest? Well, to answer that, around 20% of the universe is dark matter. I don't know what that is, but scientists have a bit of an idea. Well, Olivia, that's still not totaling to 100%, so what else is out there? Well, most amazing top 10 viewer, apparently the rest is dark energy, and here's the worst part about that. Your guess on what that is just as good as mine, and the scientist's guess is only more educated, but still, no one really knows. So now, maybe, if you didn't previously know this, you'll also be on a trip to Spiral Town just like me. The discovery of dark energy combined with the lack of answers on what it could be is, to me, about as shocking as it gets.
Kicking off the list at number 10, a really old bird. Yep, I'm kicking this list off with a tiny Chinese bird, a little wooden bird. This figurine is incredibly old. It looks like a wooden Monopoly piece almost. It's tiny. And when I say old, I mean like really old. It was carved 13,000 years ago. To give you an idea of how old that is, the pyramids aren't even 5,000 years old yet. Yep, mind blown. Just hit you with that one. About half an inch tall, small sculptures like these, perching birds to be more specific, were quite common in ancient Chinese art forms from the Neolithic age. Back in 1958 at the Lingjing site in China, a well was dug out. Now the construction crew went about 16 feet down, and unbeknownst to them, the dirt pile that was accumulating held secrets to our history. Inside this pile there were ancient tools, sculptures, broken ceramics. Then cut to 2005, archaeologists at Shandong University found one of the most important piles of dirt in the world. More importantly, they found this tiny little bird. How cute is that? And you could eat this thing, it's that small. Any piece of history that you could eat, that's rare. That's a pretty rare find. It's like finding a diamond, it's so small. Number 9. Dark Ages tomb. Looking back to the Dark Ages in Shamir Heights, northern Israel, this tomb is massive. It's made up of 400 tons of boulders and stretches to about 65 feet wide. This burial chamber goes back to 4,000 years ago. It could mean that humans were part of an organized society that long ago, especially consider the art that they found on the ceiling inside the dolmen. Check this out. This is the first time art has been documented in one of these chambers in the Middle East, and we haven't quite figured out what the ceiling carvings depict yet. So far we think arrows or anchors of some sort, but inside the actual grave there were 3 sets of human remains found as well, so it had been used for quite some time. While excavating the ancient grave site, archaeologists also found colored beads. One of the most intriguing parts of this grave has to be the lines carved onto the ceilings. All these lines connecting to one arc. What does it mean? Any thoughts? Put them down below. Number 8. The fall of the Roman Republic. Okay, looking back to 44 BC, we thought Julius Caesar getting assassinated was a major factor for the Roman Republic's downfall. Well, you know what's even more dangerous than a bunch of dudes running at Julius Caesar? A volcano. Yeah, it's a bit louder too. Thanks to science, we think the main villain in this story came from 6,000 miles away. About a year before Caesar's death, the Omak volcano went off on an island near Alaska. Now the ash cloud that drifted over afterwards, they were such a big deal, and we believe that it caused Rome's social downfall. We look at Arctic ice samples like we do with tree rings. We can literally see layers of history. So we compared the volcanic material to rocks surrounding the volcanoes, and we connect the dots. Bob's your uncle. Sorry, Julius Caesar. We thought you were kind of cooler. I don't know. You're still pretty cool. Number 7. A really old cat. We've covered the Nazca lines here on this channel before, but have you heard about this relaxing fat boy? The Nazca Desert in Peru was already fascinating with its geoglyphs, but among the 2,000-year-old massive pieces of ancient art, we had this massive cat that predates the Nazca lines. See, the cat was from the late Paracas era around 500 BC, whereas the lines were from the Nazca culture around 700 AD. It's about 37 meters long, it's big, and we caught it last year at a pretty good time. It was actually really close to fading away thanks to natural erosion, and now the fat cat has since been conserved. Let's go pet it. Let's go pet this giant cat on this big hill. Imagine seeing that, I'd be like, oh, great joke, guys. No, it's a real thing from thousands of years old. No idea why. Number 6, Forrest Fenn's treasure. Somebody called Nicolas Cage. We found treasure. We did it. And by we, I mean the 33-year-old Michigan medical student Jack Stueff. Back in 2010, to fill you in a bit, millionaire Forrest Fenn kicked off a literal treasure hunt. He said he'd hidden $1 million worth of treasure in the Rocky Mountains somewhere, and the only clue as to where it lays was a 24-line poem. Yeah, like it's Zelda Breath of the Wild. How exciting is that? This treasure brought in thousands of hunters, obviously, 5 of which lost their lives trying to find this thing. It was a big deal. Jack only found out about this treasure hunt in 2018, so he was late to the party, yet still he found it. Interesting. Obviously, there's no details as to where it was found. Jack remained anonymous for quite some time, because there were legal battles, there were court dates, and honestly, I'd love to see a movie about this whole thing and how it went down. Show us the story of Forrest Fenn's hidden treasure hunt. Add a little Hans Zimmer in the background. Debit. I'll go see that movie twice. Number 5, Ice Age art. More ancient artwork, this time from the Colombian Amazon. Thing is, unlike other drawings found on the ceilings of tombs, this canvas stretches about 8 miles. The paintings are even more impressive than that. Dating back to 12,000 years ago, these drawings were made near the end of the last ice age. Thousands of paintings, by the way, not just a handful of arrows either. A lot. These were found in 2017, but it was only last year when they went public with their findings. Those findings being paintings of elephants, massive sloths, horses from the Ice Age, snakes, birds, and deer. This is now one of the largest collections of rock art in South America. Pregnant women or the origins of the Ninja Turtles. Number 4, more mummies. Summer 2020. While most of the world was stuck inside watching Netflix, more than 100 sealed coffins were found. And yes, they're occupied. Found of course in Saqqara, Egypt, Egyptian archaeologists have never been more excited. Honestly, I'm pretty jazzed too. Maybe we'll find the body of Cleopatra. Wouldn't that just be dandy? The fact that we found over 100 of these still in great shape is mind-blowing, because grave robbers have been around since ancient Egyptian days, and for all of those to be untouched for this long, crazy. The findings date back to 712 BC, which was a period where Egypt was controlled by foreign civilizations, like Persians and Greeks, and the idea that we're finding mummies is great and all, but I've seen too many Brendan Fraser classics to not be a little concerned at the same time. Please don't open them. I don't know, just leave them. We don't really need to know. Do we? We opened a sarcophagus and like this ooze came out, and now coronavirus is a thing. I'm just saying, do the math. You just check out. Number 3, an ancient zoo. Many moons before the pyramids were even built, Egyptians were visiting petting zoos. 6,000 years ago, Heracleopolis was a booming town sitting alongside the Nile River. In Mike Tyson fashion, you would flaunt your wealth by getting an exotic animal as a pet. Yeah, as a pet is very important here. There were excavations done back in the late 19th century by English archaeologists James Quibble and Frederick Green. They were the ones who discovered that this town was thriving with over 10,000 residents, but when further studies were performed, we also discovered the remains of elephants, baboons, and a hippo, right next to the remain of their owner. Of course, what a weird funeral. These archaeologists found remains of baboons surrounding humans. I can only imagine their first thought upon finding this. We found a body next to a hippo. Is this a crime scene or an unbreakable bond? Animals are cute, you know, even if they're hippos that can eat your head. Still nice. Number 2, Ötzi the Iceman. Discovered in September 1991, this mummy was found on the border of Austria and Italy. He's Europe's oldest known and natural mummy. He was covered in ice shortly after his death, so most of the 45-year-old man from the Copper Age was left in rather good condition. I say that, I mean he's a literal corpse, like bones, but it was good condition for a mummy. A 5,000-year-old man was found in ice. Take that, Captain America, eat that. Before he died in the Italian Alps, Ötzi had a number of health problems. He had arthritis, Lyme disease, and he was lactose intolerant, which I think is the worst of all. Thanks to science, we know that Ötzi the Iceman was sharpening his tools right before his death. It's almost like he had a hunch that he was about to be brutally killed. Sorry, Ötzi. Number 1, the origins of spirituality. Cave drawings go back thousands of years. We're still trying to find the origins of spirituality in a sense. You know, these gods are appearing in all these religions, these half-human, half-animal hieroglyphs are popping up. We've recently found a cave painting going back 44,000 years ago. That's making us rethink Neanderthals and their ability to create spiritual drawings. Now, a team from Griffith University found this painting in an Indonesian cave in the island of Sulawesi. Again, these half-human figures appearing ages ago. This is kind of creepy. This predates the old paintings found in Europe. They were thinking of creatures, these spiritual theanthropies, long before others, meaning that this could be the first example of culture and spirituality ever to exist. Thousands of years from now, archaeologists are going to find this abandoned tunnel in the middle of nowhere, and then right on the ceiling it will say, "James was here," in Sharpie. That'll be the next version of this in millions of years. Art is art, even if it's, you know, someone drawing something in a bathroom stall or someone drawing something in a cave 45,000 years ago. I kind of like the latter a bit more.
Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have the mass grave. Last year in 2021, archaeologists who were excavating the ruins of Chan Chan, which was once the capital of the Chimu Empire, they stumbled upon a mass grave that held the remains of 25 people. Most of the skeletons were that of a woman, and they are said to have been wrapped in a sort of cotton fabric before being wrapped in a material made of plant tissue. Some of the women were even placed in a seated position with their legs bent, some with needles, chalk, and sewing objects placed near them. There were also quite a few ceramic objects found in the grave as well. The abundance of artifacts found here has led researchers to believe that these people were considered elite members of the society. The empire that these people are believed to have belonged to was one that is said to have fallen to the Inca sometime between 1465 and 1470. In our number 9 spot today, we have the 500-year-old tomb. Just over a month ago at the end of June, scientists unearthed an Inca-era tomb that laid underneath a home in Peru's capital, Lima. The tomb is said to be at least 500 years old, and the lead archaeologist of the discovery team said that it contained, quote, multiple funerary bundles. This tomb is said to likely be holding the elite from the time, and the current owner of the home the tomb was found under was absolutely bursting with pride. He explained that he hoped that the find would create a better appreciation for the rich history around all of those who live in the area. The find only came because the owner of the home was planning on some new building things. Because of this, there was a required archaeological survey, and thank goodness for that, clearly. In our number 8 spot today, we have the Nazca Lines. If you were to head to the Nazca Desert, just about 200 miles southeast of Lima in southern Peru, you'd find the most famous geoglyphs in the world, the Nazca Lines. Researchers believe that these lines might be something like 2 millennia old, and other than how they are incredible works of art, they are completely baffling. The geoglyphs are more than 800 long white lines etched into the desert, as well as 300 geometric shapes and 70 different animal figures. The biggest shape stretches about 1,200 feet across, which leads to my point about why these lines are so incredibly fascinating. These images can only be fully seen from high above in the air. So thinking back 2,000 years ago, how did humans make these without the vantage points we have now? I'm not exactly exactly sure, but it is definitely nothing shy of amazing. In our number 7 spot today, we have the Paleo Burrow. Back in 2010, a geologist named Amilcar Adami heard rumblings of an insanely impressive cave that was located in Brazil. He knew he had to check it out, and after asking around a bit, he eventually found out the location of it. When he first arrived, while he was absolutely shocked at what he found, because he was unable to contact the owner of the land, he wasn't able to fully inspect the cave. The reason the cave was so interesting was because of the fact that he could tell it wasn't created by some sort of geological process. Finally, in 2015, he was able to return to the cave for study, and this is when it was realized that this was the first paleo burrow ever discovered in the Amazon. Seeing the strange features of the cave as well as what looked like claw marks on the ceiling, it became clear that this cave was created by generations of some sort of gigantic, ancient, burrowing creature. It is believed that the animal responsible for these caves is an extinct species of ground sloth that grew to be 15 feet tall and was 5,000 pounds. It's an incredible discovery that unveiled even more than what might have met the eye. In our number 6 spot today, we have Machu Picchu. Perhaps one of the most famous archaeological discoveries in South America, this incredible and stunning site was built over 500 years ago, and it was once known as the lost city of the Inca. Our modern discovery of this site came in 1911 when the archaeologist Hiram Bingham and his team stumbled upon it almost accidentally while looking for another ancient city. The stones used to create this site weighed over 50 tons, and it certainly doesn't have a location that would have been convenient to its construction. Through earthquakes and all of the terrible weather that the Earth has seen in the last 500 some years, Machu Picchu remains, and that is a testament to how brilliant their work really was. In our number 5 spot today, we have the Inca mummies. In 1976, researchers found 2 mummies at a burial site in northern Chile. These 2 corpses belonged to 2 young women who were the victims of human ritual sacrifice. It is likely that the sacrifice they were a part of was one that was carried out by the Inca to commemorate either historical or political events, or as a response to a natural disaster. The mummies were found wearing silver ornaments, and they were surrounded by ceramic vessels, and they were wearing red robes. The red in the Inca clothing was often created using hematite or other iron oxides, but upon further inspection of these mummies, it was revealed that their red clothing held something much more dangerous. The dye used for their clothing contained cinnabar, which is a mineral rich in mercury. This was often used in the ancient world as a pigment for makeup, clothing, and paint, but handling it leads to mercury poisoning. What is strange is that researchers believe that the toxicity of cinnabar was known in ancient Peru, so we aren't exactly sure why they used it in the first place, but it's thought that it might have been used as protection against grave robbers. In our number 4 spot today, we have Pumapunku. This site is located in Bolivia, and it boasts a series of stone structures. One of the most notable and remarkable things about this site is how precisely the stones here were cut. It is believed that this site dates back to somewhere around 536 AD, and while it now lay in ruins, it is thought to have once been an incredibly wondrous place filled with things like polished metal plaques, bright ceramics, and a bunch of different fabrics. It isn't quite known exactly what this site was used for entirely, partly because of its age, but also because of the lack of written record and the deterioration that can be seen at the site. Because of the impressive size of the site as well as the technology that was used to build it, this is a place that many people often say was built by aliens, but it was actually just the Incas. They were incredibly talented craftsmen, and just because we couldn't pull it off today doesn't mean we should take their credit away. In our number 3 spot today, we have Whale Hill. In 2010, in the Atacama Desert in Chile, some road work was being done when the fossils and bones of 40 whales were found among the remains of other marine animals. Remember, this is in the desert and about 40 meters above sea level, so how is this even possible? I feel like I could totally understand like maybe a few fish, but 40 whales, some dolphins, seals, and swordfish? Something strange certainly must have been at play. Like I'm sure many of you are thinking, maybe the remains were from a time when the sea was once there, but unfortunately that too has been debunked. It isn't exactly clear what happened here, but the belief is that these animals may have consumed some kind of toxic plant or algae and somehow ended up washing ashore only to pass away in this location. In our number 2 spot today, we have Sacsayhuaman. This site is located in Cusco, Peru, and it is another fascinating and seemingly impossible stone structure that was built by the Incas. This structure was once believed to have been a fortress, but now it is believed it may have actually been used for things like ceremonies. Why this is another incredible creation is because of the fact that we can't quite figure out how it could have been built. The stones in the structure fit together so perfectly that they're able to stay together without anything holding them in place, and they've done so for years and years. This, coupled with how large some of the stones were, is enough to completely stump experts. Despite how well the stones all fit together, apparently they all have different shapes, which has led researchers to believe that the building design was kind of made up as the structure was being built. Imagine that, improvising building a structure and it lasts for hundreds of years and goes on to stump humanity for a while. I'm just saying, this is pretty cool. It becomes more and more apparent how talented and brilliant the Inca really were. In our number 1 spot today, we have the sacrificial offerings. In 2018, researchers sent some remote operated robots beneath the ground in Peru at an archaeological site. These robots stumbled on more than anyone ever imagined when they found a network of 35 interlocked underground tunnels dating back 3,000 years. This was already an unbelievable discovery, but it turned dark when inside these tunnels, the team found a bunch of human remains. While finding a mass amount of remains would be a terrifying experience, there were 3 skeletons that stood out from the rest. They specifically stood out because they weren't like the others. They weren't the skeletons of people who had a high social standing, which almost all of the others appeared to be. These remains they found were from people who were sacrificed in rituals. They were able to determine this because of the fact that these bodies were found face down under piles of rocks, which is of course not how people of a high social standing would have been buried at this time.
Number 10. The growing doll. Let's kick off this list with one that definitely terrifies me the most. If you think dolls are creepy, then just wait until I tell you about this one. In 1918, a man in Japan purchased a seemingly normal doll for his sister. Unfortunately, the sister passed away soon after, so the family created a shrine in her memory and placed the doll within it. As time passed, however, they noticed something incredibly unsettling about the doll. It was growing hair. That's right, the hair on the doll was getting longer and longer as more time passed. Because of this, they believed that the doll had become possessed with the restless spirit of the little girl. As a result, they entrusted it to the care of a temple where it still remains to this day, growing more hair. You are able to go to the temple and visit the doll, but photography is strictly prohibited. The priests at the temple say that the doll's hair has now grown down past its knees, and they say that her mouth is opening, slowly growing human teeth. Number 9. Inunaki Tunnel. Deep within the mountains of Fukuoka, Japan, you will find the Inunaki Tunnel, home to a dark and troubled history. In 1988, the remains of a young man were found within the tunnel, having been killed by a group of teenage boys. It has also historically been a training ground for Buddhist practitioners who say that the tunnel is a spiritual hotspot for lost souls. As a result, the tunnel has been sealed off with concrete blocks, but there is an opening at the top where anyone who's foolish enough can climb up and sneak inside. People who have gone inside have reported the feeling of being watched by a malicious energy, with reports of camera malfunctions, paranormal activity, and unidentifiable noises taking place within the tunnel. Some people say that they can hear the cries of the man who died within, his spirit potentially haunting the now abandoned place. Number 8. Buddha Statue. In 2014, an ancient golden Buddha statue was examined and researchers discovered a horrifying secret hidden within. X-rays showed the body of a real monk that had been mummified within the statue, sitting in the exact same position. Researchers believe that the man had taken part in a process known as self-mummification. Centuries ago, this was a common practice for Buddhist monks across Asia. To avoid fat and moisture causing their bodies to decay after they died, they would eat little to nothing in the time leading up to the end of their lives, eating things like pine needles, tree bark, and sesame seeds. This process would last for years as they got older, and they would then ingest a poisonous sap to finally end their lives. Researchers believe that the man inside the statue was a Buddhist monk who died around the year 1100. What was most unsettling though was that the man's body was basically hollow, containing papers covered in messages instead of his organs.
Number 7. Kappa remains. The kappa is a cryptid that is native to Japan. For anyone who doesn't know, a cryptid is described as an animal whose existence or survival to the present day is disputed or unsubstantiated. Some famous cryptids include Bigfoot, Mothman, and the Loch Ness Monster. A kappa is a water creature that is described as being green, having a scaly skin and webbed feet, long elastic arms, and looking humanoid. They are said to lure people to pools of water where they then drown them. If you're looking to avoid being drowned, then it is recommended to carve your name and birth date on a cucumber and feed it to a kappa, because then they'll apparently leave you alone forever. In May of 2014, the remains of an actual kappa were supposedly discovered and then put on display. They were apparently from a kappa that was killed all the way back in the year 1818. It doesn't seem to have been confirmed what the remains are, so could this be actual evidence of cryptids being real? Number 6. Goddess of Death. If you're a fan of cursed objects, then let me introduce you to this statue titled the Woman of Lem, also known as the Goddess of Death statue. It is crafted out of limestone around 3500 BC and was discovered in Cyprus in 1878. I know what you're thinking, isn't Cyprus a part of Europe and not Asia? Well, actually, while the country of Cyprus is culturally and politically a part of Europe, it is geographically in Asia and considered transcontinental. So it counts. And if you think it doesn't count, you can take it to the complaints department. Alright, back to why this statue is cursed. Every single family that it has belonged to over the generations has died. The first family to own it had 6 members, all of whom died within 7 years of coming into ownership. The second owner's family died after only 4 years. The third family to own it also started passing away, but the 2 remaining members seemed to realize what was happening and donated it to the Royal Scottish Museum. Number 5. King Tut's trumpets. Let's take a look at some more cursed objects, this time from King Tut's tomb in Egypt. In 1922, a group of archaeologists entered King Tut's tomb and found many interesting objects, including a set of wooden, silver, and bronze trumpets. In 1939, BBC Radio recorded the sound of the trumpets so that people could hear the ancient instruments being played. A few months later, World War II began, and a legend started that the trumpets were capable of summoning wars. Egyptian trumpets have apparently often been used on the battlefield for alerting and directing soldiers, so the legend isn't completely unfounded. And there are Egyptian archaeologists that believe trumpets have mystical powers in relation to war. In 2011, an anonymous staff member had been photographing and documenting the trumpets and decided to play one of them. The Egyptian Revolution then taking place later that year. Number 4. Kala Bandar. Now let's travel to New Delhi, India for another apparent discovery of a real-life cryptid, this time one known as a Kala Bandar. In May of 2001, one of these creatures was apparently terrorizing New Delhi. They're described as being around 5 feet tall with thick black hair all over their body and glowing red eyes. It was also described as wearing a metal helmet and having metal claws. All over the city, reports started flooding in of attacks from the so-called Monkey Man, and citizens were terrified. A total of 3 people actually died as a result, from a woman falling down a staircase to 2 men who were cornered by the creature and fell from a building. Many reports came in of bites and scratches that had come from the creature, and people in the town were scared of even going outside, armed men guarding the neighborhoods at night. Eventually, sightings stopped coming in and the town was able to relax. Number 3. The Terracotta Army. In China in 1974, a group of farmers made one of the most significant archaeological discoveries ever. They were digging a well when they found what they thought was a statue of Buddha. In fact, it was the famous Terracotta Army. The army consists of over 8,000 foot soldiers, chariots, and horses, which were buried along the first Chinese emperor back in the year 210 BC. They were built to commemorate his massive empire. As it turns out, the Terracotta Army may be cursed, the farmers believing that any disruption to the army would bring misfortune, and as time time went on, this seemed to be true. The farmers and land were taken over by the government, business officials, and third-party groups who wanted to take advantage of and profit off the army. The farmland was demolished and replaced with gift shops and attractions. The original farmers have passed away except for two who now work in the same shops that took over their land, signing autographs for a mere $2 a day. Number 2. Lady Di. When we think of well-preserved specimens, we often think of creatures that were held in ice before being discovered thousands of years later, often still having hair, skin, and even blood in their veins. So now let me tell you about Lady Di, a human woman who was kept perfectly preserved inside an airtight tomb for 2,000 years. Researchers discovered the tomb of the woman in 1971, the wife of an important Han Dynasty administrator who passed away in 163 BC and received the burial of a royal. She was placed in a crypt with over 1,000 luxurious items like makeup and 162 statues who would be her servants in the afterlife. Thanks to the seal of the tomb, when she was found 2,000 years later, she was still in incredible condition. She had soft skin and hair and even eyebrows and eyelashes, and they were even able to find her last meal, which was melon, and the cause of her death, which had been a heart attack. Unfortunately, since she was discovered, her body has now started to decay, and only pictures can show what she used to look like. Number 1. The Hope Diamond. The Hope Diamond was first discovered in a mine in India, triangular in shape and being described as a beautiful violet color. It was then placed in a statue from which it was apparently later stolen, the thief suffering from an extremely unfortunate death. Since then, it has been said that the Hope Diamond is cursed, anyone who has owned it or even merely touched it having a similar fate. Some owners include Jacques Collet, who took his own life, Princess de Lamballe, who was killed in the French Revolution, and Jean Le Tavernier, who was killed by a pack of wild dogs. The diamond finally came into ownership of Harry Winston, who made the wise choice of donating it to the Smithsonian in 1958, where it remains to this day. There are many more tales of owners who were apparently cursed by the diamond, so feel free to look it up if you're interested. Since the diamond made its home in the Smithsonian, the curse has supposedly ended, and there have been no more reported victims of the jewel.
Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have Leda and the Swan. In 2018, archaeologists made a cool but also kind of startling discovery as they were searching through the remains of the ancient city of Pompeii. Painted on a bedroom wall, archaeologists found a painting that depicts quite the sensual scene between the legendary Queen Leda and, well, a swan. Of course, it was Zeus disguised as a swan, but it's still a swan, and that's super weird. Zeus in disguise is said to have fallen into Leda's arms for protection from an eagle and then managed to seduce her, although there are some suggestions and interpretations that set a much darker scene. This discovery is unbelievable because seeing this kind of art on the wall of a bedroom of an ancient city that was destroyed by Mount Vesuvius erupting in 79 AD really makes you realize that 2,000 years is such a small amount of time in the history of Earth, and although we've progressed immensely, we're still the same humans. We just have slightly better taste in art. I honestly wish I could forget about this one. In our number 9 spot today, we have the Cloudbuster. Okay, this one is kind of pseudo-scientific, but it could have serious implications and is much better left as far in the past as possible. In the 1950s, a man named William Reich created a device called the Cloudbuster that could manipulate certain kinds of energy that would end up affecting the atmosphere, and this would then change the weather patterns. It is said that the machine could affect a type of energy called orgone energy, and it is said that there was actually a successful demonstration of this machine way back in the 50s. Apparently, people have tried to recreate it but have been unsuccessful, and it's actually to the detriment of them and the area surrounding them. Honestly, we spend a lot of time messing with this planet. It makes me a little nervous, I'm not gonna lie. In our number 8 spot today, we have the zombie virus. I know The Walking Dead is a popular series, but none of us dream of living in that world. At least I hope not. What a literal nightmare. That is why in 2007, when the UK discovered that many of their caterpillars were falling victim to what became known as zombie virus, we all said, we've had enough, especially now that we've all gone through a pandemic. That kind of energy needs to be as far away from me as possible. The caterpillars were being infected with baculovirus, which stops their molting and encourages them to continue eating. Once they've eaten a bunch and they're full to the brim, the virus then tells them to head high onto a leaf, which, like, if we weren't talking about a virus that's killing them, that would have been the cutest little sentence. High on a little leaf? Anyway, it's not cute and it's sad. Basically, once they're on this leaf, if a bird doesn't snatch them up, warning, this is kinda gross, their body liquefies and explodes, and then the virus is spread onto other caterpillars below. Yeah, see? Let's all move on and fine, forget it ever happened. The caterpillars are good, everyone's fine. In our number 7 spot today we have Y2K. If you're 15 years old watching this video, listen up. Computers have been here for your whole life, but they really aren't that old. You're 15 and they're barely older than you. So when the year 2000 rolled around, everyone started freaking out because we didn't know if the computers knew about the year 2000. Basically, many computer programs at the time only accepted 2 digits for the year, like 99 instead of 1999, so everyone was freaked out that the computers would be unable to operate once the clock rolled over to 2000, because what if they think it's 1900 instead? People were worried that planes were gonna fall out of the sky, they thought that the system would reboot, think it's 1900 again, and be like, dang, we're supposed to be made out of wood. The pilot turns into the Wright brothers. Okay, but seriously, we're expecting the year change to bring down computer infrastructures like those for banking and power plants, but in the end, millions and millions of dollars were spent to create software and workarounds for this situation, and we entered a new millennia. Let's not even start talking about 2012. In our number 6 spot today we have teeth. Okay, people keep finding teeth. And like a lot of them. On 2 separate occasions, construction workers found more than 1,000 human teeth in one spot, and these 2 separate occasions happened in entirely different parts of the world. Workers in an Australian metro tunnel found a huge supply of human teeth that were over a century old, and with it they found some precious stones and cool artifacts, which made the whole teeth thing less worse, but I'm still undecided on whether or not it's worth it. Then, literally 2 months later, a team of construction workers in Georgia found another bunch of human teeth in the wall of a commercial building. My first thought is serial killer, but luckily this one isn't as grim. Documents showed that both of these places used to be the sites of dental offices, and the fact that these discoveries happened so close to one another was simply just a weird coincidence. In our number 5 spot today we have starlight. This is an insane substance that was created in the 1970s and 80s by a hairstylist and amateur chemist, Maurice Ward. Amateur chemist is like the funniest term in the world to me. Like, so was Walter White. Anyway, Maurice was able to create starlight, which was like a heat-resistant plastic that was virtually indestructible. It could withstand temperatures of up to 10,000 degrees Celsius, and it could withstand the force of 75 times that of an atomic bomb. Of course, people were begging Maurice for the recipe for this substance, and places like NASA were dying to get their hands on it. Well, Maurice was not about to let his superpower get out into the world because he feared what would happen if the recipe for it fell into the wrong hands. Seems like Maurice read a comic book or 2. Watch out, Tom Holland, Maurice is coming for your job. Maurice took the secret of how to make starlight with him to the grave and never told a soul how he managed to make it. It appears it may have been able to be recreated, however, or at least something similar, in the last few years by a company called ThermaShield. Maybe this will be a good thing, and maybe it's the beginning of the end. Can't wait till we find out. Hope they at least film it in IMAX. In our number 4 spot today we have Agent Orange. Okay, we've been having a silly fun time on this list today, but not everything can be silly and fun and sunshine and rainbows, and sometimes we have to talk about real life. Agent Orange is not Cody Banks' cousin, but it was an extremely potent herbicide that was used from 1961 to 1971 in the Vietnam War. It was intended to cut through the canopy of thick foliage in Vietnam in order to reveal the troops underneath, but instead it proved to be extremely deadly to humans. It caused cancers, birth defects, and so many more different health issues. And it's not like it was just a little bit. 21 million gallons of it were sprayed over Vietnam, which affected hundreds of thousands of Vietnamese citizens, and it also affected the US veterans who were exposed to it as well. While this is a dark part of history and it is difficult to hear about, it is also important that we don't forget things like these. Knowing our history is very important so we don't make the same mistakes again. In our number 3 spot today we have the Mars Climate Orbiter. Listen guys, we all make mistakes. Sometimes when you hear about other people's mistakes, it makes you feel better about your own because at least I don't work for NASA, so when I make a mistake I just have to read comments about it. No one is mad at me for wasting millions of dollars, just precious minutes of your life. The Mars Climate Orbiter was a robotic space probe that was launched by NASA in 1998 in order to study the Martian climate and then the Martian atmosphere. Unfortunately, in 1999 all communication with the spacecraft was lost because it ended up on a trajectory that flew it too close to the planet. Its fate either left it destroyed in the atmosphere or it escaped the planet's vicinity and ended up orbiting around the sun. Once an investigation into how this happened occurred, it was discovered that it was due to mismatched measurements between the 2 software systems, as NASA was using SI units while Martin Lockheed, who created one piece of ground software, used United States customary units. Yeah, I feel way less bad that I was 15 minutes late this morning. Sorry boss, I'm running on UK time right now. I guess I'm actually a couple hours early. In our number 2 spot today, we have Osmosis Jones 2, Return of the Jones. Here's the thing, antibiotics are super important for us and our health and are one of the most important advancements of modern medicine, but because people use them improperly, bacteria that is resistant to the medicine we have is being created, and that is a big problem. We wish we could forget it, but we can't because it's a threat to us all. Have you ever had strep throat before and they're giving you antibiotics to treat it and they tell you to make sure you take all of them even if you feel better? Yeah, there's a reason. You gotta make sure that the thing is dead and gone before you stop taking those things, or else they can learn how to fight back against basically our only line of defense. The rise of these resistant bacteria would place us in a very dark time. We're not just talking about more infections, we're talking about a collapse of healthcare. We can't do surgeries, people can't get treatment, and it's awful. 0 out of 10 would not recommend. In our number 1 spot today, we have the nothingness. You ever just sit back and think about how we're literally just floating through vast nothingness? Here on Earth, at least we have some kind of a sense of stability. Like, we're connected to the Earth through gravity, we have our cozy home in our solar system, we've got an orbit going around the sun, we've got a pet we call the moon. Things feel like home here. But when we think about it, the universe is impossibly large. Perhaps infinitely large, and we're just like smaller than a speck of dust within it. Every point in the universe is expanding away from every other point. There's no axis, there's no center, it's just endless space? I don't know. I get it, but I don't. It seems impossible, but it's just reality. I'm stressed, you're stressed, but we don't matter. What could possibly matter when there's just so much but absolutely nothing? Anyway, I'm gonna go stress about learning Excel now. That's been our list for today. Thanks so much for checking it out. I've been your host today, Olivia Kozlowski, and I'll see you next time. Bye! The caterpillars were being infected with baculovirus. In our number 2 spot today, we have Osmosis Jones 2, Return of the Jones. That's the dumbest thing I've ever said. We're not just... We're not... What was that?
This video is about abandoned places hiding dark secrets. We reveal some of the biggest and most well-known locations, as well as the locations you never would have thought of before. Click the video now to find out more!